Okay, welcome to part 3 of tonight's Opportunity Zones Meetup. Our topic tonight at this event is on skills training. As we've talked about in the 2 earlier parts this evening, we've looked at the issue of skills training, its negative impact on the economy, its negative impact on a community that's within an opportunity zone, and we've also talked about its negative impact on a project that you may want to lead or fund within an opportunity zone. So at this point, we're going to introduce this new funding model that I've been working on since 2005 as a new way to address education, and particularly in places where the current educational system is not working. And I'm not going to go too far down the road on talking about the limits of current institutional education, but particularly in the vocational skills and a lot in the fast-moving high-tech industries, it's very difficult to keep up with and bring materials and keep them out in the trenches rather than back where you have to go to a centralized institution to obtain the education. So we're going to talk about this from a funding standpoint, and then in part 4 we're going to use an example of a project that's getting ready to go live in the hemp industry to explain and illustrate better how this all works. So right now it's possible that you could create an opportunity zone fund for the single purpose of enabling skills training. It doesn't, this means that it doesn't have to be piggybacked on top of a real estate project or on top of a business project, but it can be. So if you are doing real estate or you have a business and you anticipate that you're going to have some issues getting a large enough workforce with the skills you need, you might decide to build into your business plan an element of this to support skills training using this same approach, this same model, and the same funding mechanism, just at a micro scale. But here we're going to start talking about a significant size fund that can satisfy a singular industry by a fund, and then with the potential that there are hundreds and hundreds of industries, all that could benefit from this type of funding. So we're going to get into that here and show you how this may work. So the primary business model that we're talking about is that we want to be able to provide education to a worker while they're employed, while they're generating revenue. And we're going to do this in order to enable them to improve upon their skill, to enable them to hold a job, then to master that job, and to be at the greatest level of productivity they can be for their employer, the person they're working for. And at the very simplest, what they're going to do is we're going to put them into a payroll deduction type of a program where a certain percentage of their wages are pulled out and paid to a skills training program in order to pay for the cost of development of this educational program and to deliver it, present it to the market that's out there. And at that point, this is a very, very simple model. Now, we're going to get into more complexity as we dig into this, but this is not really greatly different from any other type of educational program, other than the fact that it can move faster, it can train a greater number of people in a shorter period of time at a much lower cost. All things that are required to remain agile and address the current needs of the workforce. So a skill course, as we define it, is teaching someone how to do something that enables them to complete a task. So instead of thinking of going to school for a semester or for 4 years or something, we're going to go to the micro extreme here and say, for you to get up in the morning might require 5 skills, okay? You may have to learn how to make a bed. You may have to learn how to operate an alarm clock. You may have to learn how to do these different things. And these are all skills that you all learned already. But as we step into a new workplace, we're asking ourselves, well, what do you really need to know in order to perform this particular job? And we're going to break it into minor parts. So every little task that requires a new understanding, a new bit of knowledge, will constitute a skill and will be compartmentalized and treated as a product in a standalone package for purposes of what we're doing here. And this is important because so much of education today tends to have you do batch processing, if you're familiar with manufacturing, where I'm not going to let you buy a single slice of bread at the grocery store. You have to buy the entire loaf. Or I think the Robin Williams cartoon where a character there's 10 hot dogs and 8 buns, or is the other way around. And for some reason there was not a match there. But we're trying to get down to that single slice because that's all we need for the moment. And too much of education assumes that you need to learn all these other things. And then it tries to teach you all these other things in order to gain some efficiency in the instruction. And you may have forgotten what you started before you get done with it, or maybe obsolete before you get through the course. And this is totally different. We're talking about just in time, real time, on the job, one skill at a time type of education. So when you talk about a job position is a bundle of skills. So if I am going to be working at any particular business, I'm not using one skill. I'm probably comprised of hundreds of skills. And in my elder statesman status, so to speak, I might be embodied by thousands and thousands of skills. And as a lot of people will say, most of them aren't worth anything. I may know how to do something that nobody would ever pay for, so I can't put an economic value on it. But I know that. But if we're going to hire people, and we're saying, I'm going to define this job position, and I'm going to define it not based on your resume or what you were taught or anything like that. I'm going to do it on your ability to perform all the tasks that are important relative to this particular job position. And each one of them then will become the subject of an independent course, training product or package that will be delivered to a person to bring them up to speed and give them competency in that particular thing. Then if we define skills at a job position as a bundle or a package of skills, if we go into a career path and talk about lifelong learning, then if we start down here and we say that this person is in the mailroom and they're going to sort mail, and all they really have to do is be able to read, pick up an envelope, and then put it into the right box or onto the right wagon, so someone else will wheel it through the apartment, or the complex or the business offices and deliver these to people. Everybody talks about the mailroom clerk as being one of the least skilled, but still a skilled position as opposed to pure unskilled labor. And but as they learn, they add more skills. They can advance to a new job. They elevate their pay scale. They learn more skills, and ultimately they can end up being the CEO of the company. So when we talk about a career path for a particular business, it represents every skill needed for every job position in that particular business. And so we're going to be talking about a particular segment of the hemp industry later, and it comprises a variety of jobs, but there's only so many jobs. And if we can do all those jobs, then I could hold any position in that particular company. But if I expand it to the entire hemp industry, now I've got a suite of jobs over here, one over here, one over here. I've greatly increased the number of skills that are required in order to do everything that's necessary. But we're going to be talking about designing curriculum from this point backwards, meaning that if I'm starting to figure out which skills I want to teach, I want to make sure I've got every skill in the program at some point in time to allow the person in the mailroom to go all the way to the CEO and to graduate through that as quickly as possible, because this program, with the funding model we have, is aligned with the rapid, accelerated improvement of the individual, so they make more money, so more money comes back to the investors and the people who participate in it. We've created an alignment which doesn't exist in today's educational program, between the people who are authoring the courses, delivering the courses, proctoring the courses, and funding the courses within the job setting, so that everybody's in alignment and everybody has a reason to want each worker to advance as quickly as possible to the highest paying job. So we're talking about career paths. This is going to have employer support. We're not talking about creating these courses out of context in what we would call a or an academic setting. So the content of the courses will be defined by councils of employers who are in each of these different businesses, so that they can collectively share what they think is needed to be learned, what's most important in priority standpoint, and then they get behind this because they're going to allow their equipment to be used, their facilities, their premises, for the person to gain the experience or to test and learn how to do these particular skills, because it benefits the employer. At the same time, when we get an allocation of where does all the money go, the employers are going to get a piece of that. So for the first time, an employer has a reason and incentive to let somebody graduate to a job in another business where they make more money, rather than necessarily slowing down or holding them back, trying to keep them within their own business because they stand to gain from doing it in that fashion. So the employers are a critical point here, where they define the curriculum, they define the priorities, they define the positions, and from there then the educational teams can put together the individual courses to teach us in the most effective manner. And this is generally what this is going to look like: online education, where a person is standing at a piece of equipment like this, and they have the ability 24/7 to get a skill course downloaded here to teach them how to do whatever the task is that is at hand. And they can do this as many repetitions as they need to. This is intended to very quickly, very precisely, here's how you do this. I'm not going to teach you how to go do something outside, because this is where our focus is at. So this allows you to move through this particular process. Then once you get to a certain point, we are going to have people who are going to verify that you have learned this. So this is like gaining a MicroDiploma that says we, either as a trade association, as your employer, or a third-party service, have been able to view your ability to perform this task to a certain level of quality, and we are going to sign off that you have mastered this sufficiently to say you own this skill. So as you move through your career, you're now saying, well, I'm not defined by my resume anymore, which is a highly subjective, questionable way of communicating what I'm capable of. I'm going to be defined by every certificate that I've got in the stack that says I can do this, and somebody else has objectively verified that I'm capable of performing this particular task. So then we get into the funding. So the idea is that this money is going to come from the employer, the worker. We're going to do a payroll deduction. We're running some business models right now that suggest that depending upon the rate of pay, the worker is going to give up maybe as much as 8 to 10% of their payroll check for this education, which is enabling them to hold the job and also to advance to the next job. As you go up the pay scale, you could lower the percentage, and we may do some sliding scale stuff when we get into more complicated models. But we're going to start allocating where all this money goes to. So right now, these are all the people who would participate in 100% of this deduction. We start with the author of the course. This is the expert. And as the expert, they know what needs to be done, how to do it best, source of best practices. But the person who knows that typically doesn't know how to educate, or they don't have the time. So this is one of the disconnects in the educational industry, is we have knowledge separated from the ability to communicate that knowledge. So we have a developer who understands curriculum development, how to do that. Then we have a platform, which is an online service that allows us to deliver this 24/7 anywhere. We'll have proctors. These are the people who do the certification. The employer plays their role. We will have counselors to move people every 6 months or maybe every quarter. Each worker who's subscribed into this system will have the ability to talk with a person, review their skill set, look at all the jobs that are available in the industry, and ask the question, if I learn these 3 or 4 or 5 more skills, can I get a promotion? Can I get a pay raise? Can I jump jobs or jump job positions? Then we have ordinary cost of doing business, including a profit allocation to the training program, and we have money set aside for the investor. Now, in this particular model that we're running right now, we have about a 12.5% set aside for the investor. So out of every dollar, 12.5 cents, every dollar is coming from the employer, the worker, 12.5 cents is going directly to the investor to pay them back for the cost of putting the educational curriculum together and then making it available to the workforce. So that basically concludes what we're talking about here in terms of a skill training program and the primary business model. In some ways, it seems very similar to, well, what if I go to college? What if I take a 4-year degree, I borrow money, and I get the degree, and I go out and go get a job? So that, yes, there is a cost. Somebody had to create the accounting programs or the whatever study degree that you're pursuing. Somebody created all those educational materials. You'll have instructors in the classroom who are there. You'll have periphery support people doing this. You'll have bricks and mortar buildings doing that. And yes, there's a cost to that. And right now, one of the questions is student loans crushing, millennials and the X generation, Z generation, whoever the youngest victim is of having to pay more money to get educated than that job as an investment can rationally pay back. So this is intended to try to drop the cost on this. And I was trying to explain to someone, they said, well, oh, I could go do all the training on that. And I said, no, you can't. I said, the goal for this is that any single course can be taught 1,000 times in a week across the United States at a very low cost, which means you can't have one-on-one mentoring, you can't even have one-on-many classroom styles. You can't force people to go somewhere to do something. All those are impediments to delivery of knowledge just in time, in real time, at low cost. So we're talking about moving away from a relatively inflexible, centralized mega view of how you do education to something that is broken down, that can be taught on-site while somebody's working as part of their employment, and allows them to progress as rapidly as possible through that employment, and at the same time maximize that productivity to the employer, which is commonly not available. Too often, the skills that you need are either not taught at all, or they're out of date, or some other reason. And so we're going to see places where this is immensely valuable, and it makes a lot of sense, and there'll be places where it doesn't work so well. This isn't going to fix everything, but if we're starting a brand new industry, we have no workers at all, I would not, you can't wait for the regular educational institutions to catch up with it, because you'll always be behind the curve. When you're working in a technology that moves faster than the rate of a 4-year degree, you're going to be behind the curve. If they can't afford this because you're working in lower economic structures with people with lower wages, lower skilled jobs, but nonetheless skilled jobs, this can work. It won't necessarily work all the time, as I said, but that's where we're coming from. So we're going to take one more break.
Just like there are people who choose not to go to school for time reasons, financial reasons, there would appear to be a potential adoption rate of those who would be willing to give up 8 to 10% of their paycheck to advance their skills, and others who don't see it as valuable or just simply don't have that 8 to 10% given their economic situation. Do you have an idea of what the adoption rate is anticipated to be, or is it still unknown because this is such a unique approach?
Yeah, so the question is, what's the probability, what's the proportionate amount of people who are likely to easily be early adopters of this type of a program. And in talking with a lot of people since 2005, when we first started floating this concept and trying to figure out how it might work, what we have found is people who desperately need a job are happy to give up 8% just to have the job. So if the employer says, I'll take you on if you look like you can learn on the job as we go, it's a no-brainer to those people because it's a difference between a job and no job. If we're talking to someone who is interested in improving their skills and getting to a higher pay because they have a family or some other thing, again, it isn't a big deal. Now, the employers may need a little more flexibility. We've worked with a number of employers. We talked to them about, well, maybe you do an 8+1, where 8 hours on shift and you have an hour of vocational training that takes place before, during, or after work, in order to accommodate it, because you don't want them having to go somewhere else and expending that time and that money, or maybe the person's double shifting and they don't have that extra time. So it really needs to be on-the-job learning, and the employer's got to be okay with that. But we believe that the numbers are going to indicate that their higher productivity is going to more than offset any loss of time that might have been taken up in the education. Then in talking with certain employers, and I met with one last week, he said, I'm growing as fast as I can, and my number one constraint is people. I'm doing something that's never been done before. I cannot find anybody who's been trained because it's never been done before. So I really have no choice except to look at every possible solution to this problem right now. Now, clearly these are the easy early adopters, and in any type of investment, I always talk about going to the person who has the greatest pain, who has the greatest need, because they're the ones who are going to do something right now. And so my primary concern is, can we get a foothold of significant size and significant traction and demonstrate how this works? And I'm actually not concerned about that. I think that, as we'll show in the next part here, that the hemp industry and several other industries all have these same types of attributes, where they're in a desperate need for new skilled workers, and they really don't have any alternative.
What's the turnaround time for creating a course?
The original curriculum development is going to be slower than I would like, because I want the whole thing in context. I don't want to start creating a course here and a course here and then finding a gap in between. I don't want to start creating a course which is unimportant when there's 4 courses that are more important. So if we were to do this correctly, precisely, and life never allows us to do that, we would probably take about 3 to 6 months, where we'd create a council of employers who are in the same zone. We would come to them with a mapping of what we think the skills might need to be for the positions in their businesses, and we would go through an interactive feedback for that 3 to 6 months to define what the jobs are, what the positions are, and what the skills are for each of those jobs, and what the priority is. If we're only going to do 100 for this job, what are the 100 skills you would prefer for us to teach? Now, if we start on the other end of this, where we're talking with experts who do the work every day, we're not coming in blind to the situation, so we're going to be putting on the table straw man proposals. This is what we think this should look like. Let's talk, let's make sure we're getting feedback on this. But to do an industry well, I think you're probably looking at 6 months to a year to map it out, but we don't have to wait that long in order to start. We can take a single job position, we can do what we're going to call best efforts, framing it up, and we will put out some courses and can start selling them immediately, and we can start generating revenue. Now, our concern will be that, yes, this isn't smoothly aligned to transcend from one job to the next job and one skill to the next job, and that's going to take some time, particularly where you're talking about a skill that may be transportable across all industries, or a soft skill. And as we're doing allocations on this right now, roughly, we're talking about 80% being technically oriented, as we would call it, or how to perform the task. 10% would be business oriented, which would have to do with how this makes the business run better. And 10% might be theory, which is why are you doing it this way, as opposed to just doing it this way. So we're not training monkeys, we're training pseudo engineers with real world experience. But it is going to take some time. Again, once we get to a certain point though, we see that these courses can be updated every 24 hours to keep them current. And the idea is to create a micro marketplace where you have 2 to 3 leading authors on each course who are all competing to be the best to get the most sales for those particular courses using a star rating of some kind. Other questions?
Well, just to tie this back to opportunity zones, so I understand what you're talking about when you talk about skills and skills development and training and even the funding of it. So you started off by saying that you could set up like an opportunity zone fund that would invest in a business that would create and offer and sell these micro learning processes. I mean, I understand. I mean, I went onto YouTube and I watched a video by a mechanic on how to replace my low beam. Right, it was fantastic, right? I thought, wow, we could do more of those. In fact, you can learn how to boil an egg on YouTube if you want, right? But you're talking about putting it into a fund as a specific business model to then market to.
Right. So yeah, right. One of the options here would be to create an opportunity zone fund for skills training for an industry,
right,
or even a business. Okay, right, within an industry, you can get very, very narrow. And the idea is that that money would be used to hire an author, hire a developer, right, put the thing together, put it online, and start selling it through the employers to the people who are in those job positions. Then the employee is doing a payroll deduction, which comes out of their paycheck, and a percentage of that goes back to pay for all these activities, which is the allocation that we were talking about right here, is that out of $1, I've got 15% going to the developer, 13% going to the investor. I've got 20% going, to other people. And we may adjust how much money is allocated to everybody, but some of these people are going to take money from the fund.
But see, this part I understand, that's no problem there.
Yeah.
But you're just talking about setting up a fund to do, I'm just trying to tie it back to the opportunity zone, why you couldn't do this just anywhere inside.
Well, you could.
This is just a business that you can create,
No.
which would be opportunity zone qualified, right?
Yeah, this fund could actually, and we talk to people, this could be set up by a trade association all by itself. It could be set up by a cause that wants to help communities of color. It could be set up by somebody who wants to advance the environment. It could be an economic development agency who's trying to do something local, passes a municipal bond, and come back and funds this from that source.
Right.
So there's multiple ways they're doing this, and Opportunity Zones is just one of those.
And you're anticipating that some of these opportunity zone businesses will have such a need and desire for this, like the hemp industry, which is the blank canvas, or the accelerated tech piece of things, that, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and the thing is if I'm moving in my business into an opportunity zone and I'm going to be short of workers, then I need to be thinking about where am I going to get them trained. Now, I may say I'm going to put part of my money into the education, or I'm going to support a fund being created for this purpose. There's several different ways that could happen. The thing that's, I will say that the reason why this may be more pertinent today is that if you look at a long-term investment, such as an opportunity zone, where you're saying the value is building through this 10-year cycle. Well, if you look at a person, particularly when who's starting their career, their value is down here when they start, but every year that they learn more skills, their value is building. And that's where you start seeing correlations of characteristics between a 10-year build of a career and a 10-year build of an opportunity zone. Yes, Ron?
It seems to me that one of the biggest advantages of doing this in an opportunity zone is that this is going to be a relatively low capital investment with potentially high final value if it's adopted.
Yeah, it depends on the industry and the number of players. Yes.
I'm just saying,
yeah.
The trends right now is lots of money is going into education. The number of investments by count are going down. There's consolidation, bigger business, this might be one of those, get it going, get it adopted, get it scalable, and it becomes a big flip.
Well, and as an example, and you'll see this in some of the business modeling we did. In this case, we're current model, we're allocating 12.5% of the paycheck deduction to the investor. And with the price point of $50 per course and needing 100 courses to master a position, you would need about 800 people to take the course to break even from an investor standpoint. But if you're in an industry where there's 5,000 workers to be trained on this same skill set, this has a lot of upside potential. It's like a software package that once you recapture your original cost of development, it's almost all profit beyond that point. It becomes a digital product with high value. And so this could be one of the hybrids where if you're working with a real estate project that is not doing so well, or worse yet, a community project which has a very poor projected return on investment, the community may want to augment or leverage the ROI by blending it with an educational project of this nature in order to create a higher blended ROI. Okay. We're going to take a break here.